The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I am your host. I am your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, Simul Radio, Simul TV, and on iHeartRadio. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And if you'd like to find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Christopher Balzano. And Chris is a writer, researcher, folklorist, and the current host of the podcast Tripping on Legends. He has been documenting the unexplained since 1994 and has been a figure in the paranormal world through his books, articles, and his work as the director of Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads and now Tripping on Legends. Chris is the author of several books about regional hauntings, dark woods, cults, crime, and the paranormal in Freetown State Forest and Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, as well as the collection of true ghost stories, Ghostly Adventures, and the How to Paranormal books, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, and Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. His most recent book, Haunted Objects, Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelf, capture stories of everyday people who have accidentally allowed spirits into their homes. Joining me now is Christopher Balzano. And Chris, welcome back to the X Zone.
Thank you very much. It's been way too long since we've talked to each other.
It has been, my friend, and congratulations on all the wonderful things that you've been doing and how hard you've been working to get the paranormal normalized in everybody's daily life so that the spook factor isn't there, but getting back to basics and trying to investigate and discover and prove that the paranormal does exist. So congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, I think that a lot of people sometimes feel that those are two separate things. I run across that idea all the time. I'm a middle school teacher. I've just actually taken a position as a high school teacher, and you'd be surprised how when you say the word ghost, there's still that pushback, and yet these stories, these ghost stories, and especially my focus now, the folklore around them and the stories around them, are part of our everyday lives already.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just kind of accepting that and seeing that for the useful tool that it can be and kind of how it's part of us.
Well, let's start off at the beginning, Chris. What brought you into the realm of becoming a paranormal investigator?
Well, back in the day, when I was a Massachusetts resident, I've been down here for about 10 years now in Florida. So I'm no longer in Massachusetts, but, you know, I was in the most haunted dorm in the United States and the most haunted building in Boston.
Wow.
And people told a lot of ghost stories of what was going on in this building. It was the old Charles Gate Hotel. It was an old mafia hotel, so there were supposed people who had died there, and a woman had committed suicide in the room like every other college in the United States, and there was a little girl and I started hearing all of these stories, and I wanted to kind of hash out what was real and what was not. And so I just started documenting people's experiences and then kind of also what they heard. And as I kind of started to expand, I came across the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44, which is this really great yet classic legend of a ghost that's seen in Rehoboth, Massachusetts. And I went out there and I was looking for the ghost and I was posting stuff about it. And this was kind of like just as the internet was hitting. And now all of a sudden people were saying, well, I heard of this other place. Can you go investigate it? And so, back in those days, you could go look at a book or something like that. You didn't have TV shows yet.
Right.
And so really it was just kind of in documenting the stories and getting the stories of what people were telling out there, I found myself also looking to see whether these ghosts were real. And then kind of going through the process and learning the technology, inventing technology along the way. And always in the background was that story. Why are people telling this story? Why are people feeling that this place is haunted? And then, for 15 years, I was, knee deep in trying to prove that these ghosts were real and trying to bring that information to people and convince them that these stories that they were hearing had a real happening that was at the center of it.
So were you able to prove that ghosts are real?
When I was writing my book, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, I asked about 30 different investigators at that time. And writing that book made me more of a student of paranormal investigators than a student of the paranormal, so it was fun. I asked them, what do you think it would take for people to believe that ghosts are real? To a person, and these were investigators, folklorists, demonologists, across the board, to a person, all of them said, nothing will convince someone unless they have their own experience. And I think, now that book is almost 10 years old now. I think we've done more with technology in terms of being able to manipulate audio, visual,
big time,
video, pictures. People are not going to believe that the paranormal is real until they experience it themselves. And so I have done an absolutely horrible job of trying to convince them.
I think what you've done is you've opened up the eyes to so many to get out there and to prove not only to themselves but to others that ghosts are real. But what do you think a ghost is, Chris?
I've tossed this around, and I've over the years come to think that there's not one clear definition because we're just mislabeling things.
Right.
I think that we put it through whatever prism we feel is comfortable, or what we're kind of like been brought up with, or what we're learning. I think that it all has to do with energy that somehow translates to personality, an energy that somehow translates into your humanity and what that is. And that energy somehow gets trapped. And so sometimes I know there's a really big pushback against the idea of like a residual haunting, like an idea that something has been psychically recorded. I'm in the camp that believes that that's true. I think that explains a lot of paranormal activity. It's just the events and the emotion of something has been just left somewhere. It's been trapped there. But then I also believe that there's energy that's out there that can interact. For one reason or another, the consciousness has kind of existed beyond the body.
Well, is it possible? Is it possible, Chris, that the energy of a ghost is attracted to some people who have a higher or stronger electromagnetic field around them that we humans emanate, and that this is why some people actually have interactions with ghosts or have the ability to sense or see ghosts while others don't?
Yeah, and I'll one-up that as well. I think that it's true for people, and it's true for environments as well. I think that there are some environments that are more conducive to that as well. And I think that oftentimes, if there's a root cause for something, like, for example, a tragedy happens in your house,
right?
Then you can say that energy might be trapped there, and therefore your energy works with that energy to create kind of like a tumbler, and you unlock something. But if there's not necessarily a history in your house or a history of the location, and yet you're perceiving something, that's now like the environment and you you're somehow, because you're more perceptive or you're more into it and you're
Right.
more aware of what things are going on, you're able to do that. Whether that's your electromagnetic, I've never thought of it that way, because if they have energy, you have energy too.
That's
right.
right.
You have
Yeah,
to
exactly.
interact.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with your openness. So it might be a biochemical kind of thing, but it has to do with where your mind is. One thing that we've been focused on in Tripping on Legends is we always follow the signs.
Always follow
Let me
the
give you a
signs.
quick story about that.
Sure. We've got about, why don't we do this, Chris? I've got to take a commercial break in about a minute and a half now. So I really don't want to have you start and then I say, Chris, let's do a bit of a cliffhanger here, because it's not fair to you, my friend, and certainly not fair to the listeners.
Okay.
So we're going to hold off on this until we come back from this commercial break that I'm going to go to right now. Exonation, Christopher Balzano is my very special guest. We've had the pleasure of having Chris on the show before. Unfortunately, it's been over 5 years, but we're not going to let that happen again. His website is www.trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. And this is the X Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And we're still coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. As you can tell by the scene of downtown Hamilton right behind me from our studios atop of the escarpment in Hamilton. If you'd like to send me an email, it's very simple, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And Christopher Balzano and I will be back talking about ghosts, things that go bump in the night, and much more here in the X Zone as we continue on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Christopher Balzano is my special guest this hour, and Chris's website is trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. Chris has been a contributor to Jeff Belanger's Encyclopedia of Haunted Places and Weird Massachusetts, and was one of the writers behind Weird Hauntings. He has appeared in more than his name has appeared in more than a dozen other books, often called in to offer insight into the paranormal of perspective on certain cases. Once again, trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. Welcome back, Chris. And before we went to the commercial break, you were just going to give us some information.
Yeah, I was talking about following the signs,
Yeah.
and how sometimes it's our openness to the paranormal that allows the paranormal to kind of touch us. There's that great saying that for every step you take towards the paranormal, it takes 2 steps towards you. So our job has always been go with the signs. If we're feeling like we should go someplace, we should go someplace. If we're feeling like a story is fake, or we need to follow that. And a really good example of it was our very first one. I had been tracking for probably 5 years this story about the Venice bus depot in Venice, Florida, or bus train depot. And the story goes that that the Ringling Brothers used to have their summer home there, and that for some reason, because there was no tragedy or anything involved, if you go there on Halloween, which is the day that they would bring the trains back in, you will see a ghost train, and you will hear the lions roaring. You'll see the ghost train itself. You'll feel the train tracks rattling, but it only happens on Halloween Eve. And so I'd wanted to go there for so long, and I was thinking about doing it this one year. This is about 2 years ago. And I was like, I don't really know if I want to go out there. I kind of had looked at it and previewed it and gone ahead of time to see what it looked like. Part of the story is when Ringling was deciding to go to Venice, there was some pushback. And he wanted to show that his circus being there for the winter was beneficial to the community. So he only paid his employees in $2 bills. So that way, when they spent their money in town, a local business person could look at their register at the end of the day, see a whole stack of $2 bills, and knows that Ringling's people had been there. And it was, that was kind of like his gimmick.
Sure.
And I was like, if only we could have a $2 bill. I'll go there if I can get a $2 bill, and I'm kind of laughing. Now, I said I'm a high school teacher, and I was doing a dance, and I was doing the concessions. And a kid walks up to me, and he pays me with 3 $2 bills.
Whoa.
When was the last time you saw a $2 bill?
I haven't seen a U.S. $2 bill years and years and years and years.
Right. Literally, this conversation is going on in my head, and a kid hands me 3 of them. And I realized I need to go there. And so we ended up going there that night and kind of giving those bills up to the spirits that were there and hoping that they would make their presence known. And we didn't get to see anything, but we heard a train that we weren't able to identify. Like with our research, realizing there was no trains in the area at that time. So it's one of those things where we always follow what our gut tells us, which is kind of runs the opposite of what you do as an investigator. But it's been successful for us.
Why do you call it tripping and not investigating?
Well, it's legend tripping. So the classic example of legend tripping, right? The meaning of the word originally was there's something weird going on in your town, and everybody knows that there's this one place. It's a haunted house. It's Dead Man's Curve. It's whatever you can imagine, and the locals, usually teenagers, as a rite of passage almost, would go and experience this. So they said, the house is haunted. If you knock 3 times on the front door, even though it's abandoned, the lights will start to flash.
Right.
So everyone in town would do that. And it became this thing where it was a rite of passage. It meant that you were a citizen of that town, or that you had gone through what you were supposed to go through. Over time, what it came to mean, and I guess for a while, it had a really negative connotation to it. It meant you went to a supposed haunted location, and you just tried to experience the haunting, right? So an investigator goes to a location, and they're trying to prove, like you said earlier, they're trying to prove that the ghosts are real, or that the ghosts are not real, right?
Right.
Which is that word that I absolutely hate to debunk, right? A legend tripper goes for the experience itself, right? Whether something happens or doesn't happen, it's about connecting to the location. It's about connecting to the story behind the haunting. It's about connecting, and this is a really important part of it, it's about connecting with the people that you are doing it with. So it becomes an experience rather than trying to answer a question.
It sounds more like a social activity than an investigation.
And you know what? I think the majority of haunted locations, now if you have a haunting in your house and you call me, I had a friend do this around Christmas time. I said, I can go in there, I can investigate it for you, I can look into it, I can maybe give you some solutions of how you might be able to get rid of this ghost. But I did it because she was a friend. I have no desire really to investigate anymore, because it is, I think, about the social experience, because unless it's, and I bring up the house because that's something personal to you, right? But if the local forest has been the spot of these strange orbs and ghost lights and cries as if a mother has lost her child and is looking for, if that's going on, I have no connection to that story on a personal level. But what I do is I have a connection with the story on what is this saying about us as people that we make up this story. It could be real, it could not be real, but people have been telling this story for 5 years now, or 10 years, or 15 or 50 years. And not only that, there's 3 different stories as to what the cries are.
Right.
And there's 12 different stories to what the lights are. Go out there and talk to people about what they've heard, maybe what they've experienced, but also what they've heard about it. And so, yes, there is a social aspect of it that I think paranormal investigating doesn't have. We, as investigators, we load ourselves up with equipment. We go out there in the field. We rely on technology to be our eyes and our ears. We replace EMF meters with our gut, or our gut with EMF meters. And then we compile all this information, and maybe in groups of 1 or 2, we evaluate evidence we got for hours on end. It is a very isolating experience. You are looking at the questions of what happens to us after we die. What's our place in society, or what's our place in the world, and all these big questions. And the majority of it you do almost like in a little bubble. And that was no longer appealing to me. I wanted it to be an experience. I wanted the people I was going out with, I wanted to connect with people who are experts in their area of the country, or their area of Florida mostly. And I wanted to make it make connections rather than just kind of whether to prove that ghosts are real or not.
All right, so am I to understand then, folklore becomes the paranormal, or is it the paranormal that becomes folklore?
That's it. See, once you start asking that question, then you're ready to be a legend tripper. It's worked both ways. I mean, I think that there are, I think that the majority, now, like I said, we don't do anything residential, right? I think the majority of hauntings that are genuine, or maybe even not genuine, we don't understand it, right? You were talking about Jeff Belanger earlier.
Yeah.
Jeff Belanger is famous for saying, any place is haunted by the most famous person who was once there, right?
That's
so
true.
George Washington was in this house, and there's something paranormal going on. It's George Washington's ghost that's doing it.
All right. Yeah, I understand that. I understand that, Chris. But in today's world, paratourism is big, and a lot of people are making up stories about haunted locations, about haunted restaurants, about haunted hotels, haunted B&Bs, just for the business. And how is this affecting the credible tripper or the credible researcher in today's society? Like, we had enough problems with the disinformation on the internet. Now we have cities, towns, municipalities, and corporations, basically lying, creating paranormal scenarios just to get the almighty dollar.
Right. And part of the interest and part of the fun of that, for me, is to look at those stories and say, where is the origin? Okay, if the origin comes from you from last year, and I can't find anything until you said it in a tour, chances are we're not going to look into that. And we're not, and we're going to put it out there. Like, here's a story that that people have been spreading for the last year, and it really just kind of comes from this one tour guide. We were investigating, or tripping, I should say, the story of the Bloody Bucket Bridge in Wauchula, Florida.
Right.
And the story goes that there was a woman who helped deliver children, and she was a freed slave after the Civil War, and for different reasons are attributed to it. Some of it's revenge, some of it she just went crazy, some of it is that she had this weird obsession with overpopulation. She was killing some of the children that she delivered.
Ooh.
And then she would go and bury them at this one place underneath a bridge that goes through Wauchula, right near the Peace River.
Right.
And she eventually was kind of found out, and she was fired. So already my alarm's going off. So like, wait a minute. All right, a black woman in Florida who's killing babies, and they don't kill her? They don't put her in jail? They fire her?
Yeah.
Okay, something doesn't fit with this story. But the story goes that she, after that especially, went crazy. And she would go down and continuously empty these buckets of water into the water, and it would turn red.
All right, stand by, Chris. Chris, I've got to do a bit of a cliffhanger here. And we'll be back on the other side, so you just hold that bucket until we get back. Exonation, Chris Balzano is our special guest. His website is trippingonlegends.wordpress.com, and we'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. And welcome back, everyone. Christopher Balzano is my special guest this hour. Chris has appeared on radio stations across the country and throughout the internet, as well as being called upon by television shows to comment on ghosts and urban legends, including British television series Conversations with a Serial Killer. His website is www.trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. All right, Chris, you've kind of been holding that bucket ever since we went to the break over the news, so why don't we finish this story so you can give your arms a rest?
Nope. Hey, I'm a storyteller, so I don't mind leaving a good cliffhanger.
All right.
Break. So, so the story goes that if you go to the Peace River, to this one area of the Peace River, by the light of the full moon, the water will appear bright red, the blood red, and there are times when you can just put a bucket near it, and your bucket will fill with the bloody water, right? And we wanted to try this out, right? And so we made a plan, and actually, we were able to do it on the blood moon back in January and February, which was really exciting. Now, in researching that story, we weren't able to find any reference to this until it appeared in a book, right? So I won't name the book because I don't want to put out the author, even though he's passed since. But there was no information about this having existed until this book was published. So we kind of were shaking our heads saying this probably isn't real, this probably isn't. And yet the road is known as Bloody Bucket Road, right? The people in the area, it's Griffin Road in Wauchula, people have been calling it Bloody Bucket Road. So, that something has to be going on with that. And we've experienced that before where there are streets or areas that are named for the legends that are there. So we did a little bit more research, went out there, and we're actually researching even on the road. And we were able to find 4 or 5 years before the book was published, there was a woman who decided she wanted to write a good ghost story, right? And so what she did was she said, you know what, I decided they call this Bloody Bucket Road, I'm going to write a story. And so she wrote a story about why it's called Bloody Bucket Road. And that's the story that got picked up, even though it clearly says on there it's fiction. That's the story that got picked up. And for the last 10 years, people have been telling this story about this old woman dumping the remains of children at this area, and that's why the blood is red. The best part is it's called Bloody Bucket Road because there was a bar at the end of the street, right? And it was known for being so violent that at the end of the night, people would have buckets of blood from mopping up all the teeth and, and all the blood from people getting into fights all night. And that's why they called it Bloody Bucket Road.
Unreal.
But this woman decided she was going to make a fictional story. Another person, now I'm not saying that the writer made the story up or didn't do his research. What I'm saying is, what that woman wrote became the legend that people told, right? And so one person tells another person, another person tells another person. Then someone like me comes around and is writing a book, and there are 3 or 4 people who are saying that story now, and boom, it becomes the legend. So that's kind of and what we need to do is take a step back from that. There is no ghost, right? She was supposedly drowned there, and you can see her body rising from the water as well. There's no ghost there, right?
Yeah.
There's no children crying. It's not a real haunted location. And yet, we can take that idea, we can take that concept that people created this story and the history of that, right? The history of this location now going back 60 years from when the bar first opened and embrace that. As long as we do that, right? As long as we can say, this is a legend, this is maybe a real haunting, this is something we don't know what it is yet, and embrace those 3 different things and not try to be like, all right, well, because it's being told it's true, I think it's perfectly fine to explore made-up stories as part of hauntings.
And yet there are people who believe the story to be real that I'm sure actually go down to this location and they hear the screams or they see what they believe they are going to see. And how does this actually play into the paranormal scenarios that are being reported today? How much is fact and how much is made up in the person's mind?
Folklore. I mean, and I think we have gone to several different locations that I could say beyond a shadow of a doubt, the folklore behind the story, folklore behind the location is nothing more than folklore, right? And yet, one thing that we always do is we always tape record and video record everything that we do for documentation, and also we listen to the audio to see if we can get EVPs because there's still that excitement of that, right? We have heard more. I've gotten better EVP evidence in locations that are not haunted than the locations that I can say, you know what, this ghost story might be true.
So how do you explain that?
I think it has a lot to do with that whole idea of we bring what we have to the location.
Gotcha.
If you believe that this tree is where the body of 7 people were hung, and you're going there to experience that, you are going there with all of your expectations, all of your baggage. You're projecting onto that site. That site will become a haunted location.
Let me ask you something, Chris. We were talking earlier about I believe it was Venice, Florida, where the spook train was allegedly happens on Halloween night. What happens in a leap year? No, I'm serious. With all of these residual hauntings or these residual apparitions, how is it that the apparition or the haunting knows when it's a leap year or not? This is always...
I'll do you one. I'll do you one better than that.
Okay.
It says midnight on Halloween.
Yeah.
Does that mean midnight going from the 30th to the 31st?
Exactly.
Or does that mean midnight going from the 31st to the 1st?
Right. So how do we put any validity into these kind of stories? Or do we just kind of say, hey, you know what, that's a pretty good ghost story, and leave it at that?
I mean, I think it's okay if you can put it in its place. If you can understand that this is a blurred line.
Right.
If you can understand that, this is not to attack your sensibility about anything. This is not to attack your belief system. There's people who are experiencing something. Here are these stories that are attached to it. We don't quite know because it's a really fuzzy area, but it's there. And more importantly, why is it there? Why are people making up these stories? And I think if you approach it from that way, and I think if you can keep that perspective on it as someone part of that community or someone who experiences that, then it's okay.
What has been the most frightening trip or investigation that you yourself have been on, and what was that paranormal event that kind of frightened you, Christopher Balzano?
Right. All right, I'm going to give you 2 answers.
Okay.
The scariest place we've ever been is a cemetery called 100 Steps Cemetery in Brazel, Indiana. And the story goes in this cemetery, and I call it the most documented urban legend in America, in that the location itself isn't more famous than other paranormal locations. It just happens to be near Indiana University, which is the cradle of folklore research. So there are literally hundreds of reports of this story archived there, right? So it's one of the most well documented. The story goes, there's 100 steps that lead into this cemetery. If you go up and you count the 100 steps as you go, and if you get exactly 100, while you're up there, the undertaker, the original undertaker, will appear to you and tell you the moment of your death. He will tell you when you will die, okay? Then you go back down the stairs, and now one of 3 things can happen. As you're going back down the stairs, you have to count again. If you don't count 100 steps, if you've misplaced yourself somehow, you will die earlier than what he said. So you've changed your own fate. You're going to die earlier. Or if you get the 100 steps down, that's when you're going to die. Of course, the third option is you might get down to the bottom, and because of your sins, hell opens up and swallows you whole. So these are the stories that are being told about this place. And people have reported all the great classic cemetery things, lights and unknown figures and weird noises. We rolled up because it has to happen at exactly midnight. And it was a dark and stormy night. It was the perfect setting for a really good ghost experience. I've been doing this for more than 20 years now. We had a great experience during the day, having to do with Puckwudgies and the paranormal. We got there and we were so amped up that we were completely frightened and almost didn't make the climb up the stairs. It was the most intense experience we ever had. We were in the middle of nowhere. We were going up the stairs. We went up the stairs. We stayed there for about 10 minutes.
Right.
We did a video from there. We tried to talk to the guy, and then we ran to our car and went away. And we were like, we're never going back there. And the weird thing was, nothing happened to us. It was scary because of the things that were attached to it, all of these different stories. And so we psyched ourselves out. So the weird thing is one of the locations where we experienced the least was the one that was the scariest for us, right? So
Yes.
that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is we went to this area known as the
Okay,
Devil's
hold
Tree.
on here. We're going to have to take the final break. You notice how these cliffhangers happen, right, Chris? And just as you're going to get into a new story, we'll keep them waiting, Chris. Hey, Chris, thanks very much for coming back on the show. It's great having you with us, and you and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with our special guest, Christopher Balzano. His website, Exonation, is trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. And on Facebook, facebook.com, Tripping on Legends. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone, and I'll be back. You can count on that. And I don't know, going upstairs to find out when I'm going to die? No, thank you. I think I'll just leave that to good old fate. Yeah, it's nothing I'd really like to do. Now, there's a lot of people I know that I'd like to send up those stairs, but we won't get into that this hour. Christopher Balzano and I will return. Don't go away. And we're back with Christopher Balzano. His website is trippingonlegends.wordpress.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/trippingonlegends. All right, buddy, we did another cliffhanger for you. So take it away, my friend.
If you're going to do a cliffhanger, it's great to end with, and then we went to the Devil's Tree. ... Right?
Yeah.
So we had heard this story about the Devil's Tree in Port St. Lucie. It's in this area known as Okamic Park. And the background of this case is that there was a serial killer. Now, this part's actually all real.
Okay.
There was a serial killer named Gerald Schaefer who was active in Florida. He's he's thought to have killed up to 30 women in and around, and he was a sheriff's deputy, actually.
Wow.
It's interesting because you were talking about, what if an area we go there and we think something? Can we force can we create a haunting happen?
Yeah.
This is an area. This is what has happened at the Devil's Tree. Schaefer, the women he's accused of killing near there, he killed the bodies were found probably about 100 meters from this tree, and yet this tree is so creepy that it's become the focus of the legend because in other murders he had actually hung women from trees. And so there's this huge oak tree, which has got to be one of the creepiest ones that I've ever seen. So it's not surprising to me that a story develops around it. It's all the branches are growing down instead of up, which is really weird. It's all gnarly. There's kind of like the bark has all these faces in it. It could be the creepiest tree I've ever been at.
It sounds like the creepiest tree I've ever heard of.
Yeah, and we went there, and the tree is supposedly indestructible. So you can actually see where people have tried to saw into it, where people have tried to burn it. Instead of they just kind of have burnt areas of it. They haven't been able to burn it down. And we went there, and we really kind of had nothing happen to us at the time we were there. One of the things, and we've gotten some slack for this, and I think it's a little bit different, but we took some of the bark. Because one of the stories is that if you take anything from the tree, bad things will happen to you. So we wanted to kind of we wanted to see if we could antagonize that idea of it. So we took some of the bark. Immediately, we started running into car problems. My that little light that says your tires are unstable automatically went on. The engine was kind of it was all horrible, and we were like, we need to crash for the night. Now this is kind of near Orlando, Florida, which is the hotel capital of the world, right?
It sure is.
There's more hotels in Orlando than anywhere else, maybe. Nothing. There was no special events going on. We could not find every single hotel we tried to get at. We could not find it.
So why didn't you call me, Chris?
Stay.
Chris, why didn't you call me? I would have let you into our condo.
Oh, really? Are you near there?
Yeah, we have condo in Orlando.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I'm going in 2 weeks. Or is it okay if we crash?
I'll check to see if it's vacant or not.
Because we didn't even get into my Central Florida.
Really?
Stuff. But anyway, so we are. That's especially surrounding the Ocala Forest, where it's kind of like if you remember Dark Woods and you remember the discussions we've had on that. I know it's been years since we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about that as the heart of the Bridgewater Triangle. I think
right.
the Ocala Forest is kind of a center of darkness in that area, and so we've been looking into those stories. But this Devil's Tree for me kind of falls into that. So let me finish up this story,
Sure.
right? So we go to a gas station, we fill up, we put air in the tires, and I'm like, I'm getting rid of this bark. Rob, I kid you not, I put my hand to the barrel to throw the bark away. The bark literally jumped from my hand into the garbage, which is fine, right? Okay, maybe I envisioned it, maybe something. The weird part began when we started the 3-hour journey back to South Florida where I live.
Okay.
Natalie, who is my co-host and my fellow tripper, kept hearing a phone ring. And not like her phone, but like an old school, like classic phone on the wall kind of ringing. And she kept saying, "Are you hearing that?" I'm like, "No, I'm not hearing anything, Natalie." And then she'd kind of go to sleep for a little bit, and then she'd wake up again. Like, "Are you hearing this phone ring?" You know, to me, now I didn't tell it to her because it would freak her out at the time. That is a classic opening line, or if you will, of obsession leading to possession. If you've studied demonology at all, that idea of a phone ringing, and this kept happening to her the entire 3-hour ride there. We get back to my house. We decide to crash at my house, and she's like, "Do you hear that weird flute playing?" And I'm, no, and she's like, "It's weird. It's like, but it's not like a flute." And I'm like, "Is it like a pan flute?" And so I played her some Vangelis, and she was able to hear she was able to hear some of that. And he's like, "Yeah, that's really weird." Once again, that idea of a pan flute and the associations of pan with the devil as well.
Right.
Are we inventing this stuff? How many of these things have to happen before we start to see like, something weird was going on? That night, both of our dreams plagued with these visions. I don't dream at all, and yet I'm having these absolutely horrible nightmares of these things happening at the tree, things happening to us, things happening to my children, association.
Okay,
with
the dreams could be a subliminal implant based on the place where you were at and some of the things that happened. Of course, I can understand that. So I don't put a lot into the dreams so far.
No, but what it is how many of those things have to happen before you start to be like, all right, we're hearing weird things, we're having these absolutely odd dreams, and then we looked at some of the evidence, and Gerald Schaefer or something there is talking throughout the entire thing. We get these crazy responses to questions that Natalie's asking. We've got Gerald Schaefer talking to the little kid who found us in the playground and said, "Hey, you guys looking for the Devil's Tree? It's so famous in that area, even little kids know about it," and he took us to go find it. It was one of those experiences that at the time it was this really interesting legend to explore. And then we got home and we looked at the evidence. We had these experiences and we were like, that place scares us more than any other place we've been. And Schaefer's made himself known to us in a few different locations. So we've actually heard his voice on EVPs and on video in other locations we've been to, almost as if he's following us, ? Or several of these other locations, this once again has to do with the Ocala stuff, are these areas where he had other victims and we're picking him up. Those are the kind of questions that are fun to play with, once again, like we talked about earlier, as long as you take them in context, right? As long as you say, these are legends, these are stories, they're not necessarily true.
But we also have to take a
look at them.
But we also have to take a look at the physiological aspects that are related to the story from your own bodies. You were tired, you were overtired, you were exhausted, you had a preconceived idea of what could happen. the brain plays a lot of funny, tricks on people, especially when they're tired. The fact that you did not hear a telephone ringing, that you did not hear pan flutes, that Natalie did, to me, this raises questions. Well, was it really something to do with location, or was it psychological? So this is what we also have to do. We just can't take a bunch of coincidences, whether they're, especially when they're not happening to all the people that are there, but only certain people. So, how much of it is real? How much of it is psychological? And once again, where does the power of belief play into this?
Right. And the beauty of it is you take a step back and you can say, we're not sure anything happened.
Yeah.
We have not, and yet this is how haunted locations get reputations. This is how urban legends and folklore are created and are spread.
I'll give you an example.
Again, you can say that about that.
Yeah.
Right? I can't say Gerald Schaefer is in my bedroom playing a flute, right? You can't say that the devil is knocking at my door. What you can say is, when people go to this location, they have these weird things happen to them afterwards.
I'll give you an example of something that
true.
happened. I was with a friend of mine in Toronto who does a daytime talk show, Andrew Crystal. And I went on to the corner of Bloor and Yonge in Toronto, and this was part of an experiment that we were conducting on air. And I stood on the corner, looked up. I wasn't looking at anything, but all I was doing was looking up. My hands were by my side. I was looking up. Within 15 minutes, we had a crowd of 40, 50 people all looking up, and they could see something, and there was nothing there.
Right. I remember there was a classic Benny Hill skit that was like that, and at the end, the original guy walks out and he has a neck brace on. That's why his head's up like that.
Hey, Chris, the time...
But I think, and if we had longer to talk, we could spend a whole hour talking about that's why we create these things. Why do we feel this need to have these stories? Why do we have to have them?
Well, we're going to have you back on. There's no two ways about that. It's been way too long. Chris, how can people find out more about you, and where are you going to be tripping next, where maybe people can run into you?
We're like I said, we're hitting Central Florida. We've got some really great stories from Stetson University in that area, as well as the other side. I'm following some really great Native American legends that have been spread and changed and manipulated all throughout Central Florida. So that's our big trip this summer. We're not able to leave the state like we did last year. You can contact me. The best place is probably the Facebook page, because that's where we post most of our actual activities. That's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And then the website where I do a lot of my writing and publish my writing is trippingonlegends.wordpress.com.
Chris, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. Don't be a stranger. We'll have you back on in a couple of months so we can talk more about this. And happy and safe tripping, my friend.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for having me on again.
You too, partner. Bye-bye now. Exonation, Christopher Balzano has been our guest. Once again, www.trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as we continue here in the X Zone. Don't go away.